Alright, I'm going to do a video. I'm just going to talk a little bit about meat-eating lizard husbandry. And I'm going to talk about what you're feeding them. And I'm going to just, one thing that's really important to me recently, one of my friends went through a little problem. And basically the problem is, if we actually take our little captive lizards and we feed them things like grocery store meat. So this is actually beef. Let's say if we're going to talk about turkey or chicken. So let's just back up here. So if I go to the grocery store and I find, okay, I got a little monitor or whatever, I want to feed it a chicken drumstick or ground turkey or whatever, and I'm buying like this. This is packaged for people, and basically this is designed to be cooked. So if I actually go and look at some of the statistics, I'm going to look at salmonella, okay? So if we write dead center, we have chicken. And we look at reported illnesses. And chicken is pretty high. So if we consider chicken and turkey as being potentially a great source of salmonella. So these are often things that are being bought in a grocery store. So remember, from the farm or processing house, wherever the meat originated from the poor animal, it goes through a lot of hands. It also goes through suboptimal temperatures. So it is possible that the originating food animal already had contracted salmonella from the farm or from wherever, or through the rendering process or the handling process, they get all sorts of different coliform bacteria, all sorts of different nasty bacteria. Well, this is the point. If I buy this raw meat, and let's say this is tainted with salmonella or E. coli, I'm just going to pick two pathogens that can wreak unbelievable horrors to the GI tract of your pet lizard. So if I take this raw meat and I make a nice little meatball, put some calcium, D3, whatever, and I feed it to my animal, and the animal ingests it, yum, 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 eats it, great, everything's wonderful. Could there be a problem? Well, yes, there could. So if I start looking in the statistics of what is the allowable limit of the food that we eat being tainted with things like pathogens like salmonella and E. coli and coliform bacteria and all sorts of other nasties, it's pretty substantial. So the way the supermarkets have to deal with this is you're buying this to be cooked. So you're basically going to take the temperature of this product and you're going to elevate it for a long enough period of time where it will kill the salmonella, the E. coli, the other different pathogens by the cooking process. So if we take the same meat and we go and feed it to our lizard, now the animal's directly ingested it, what is the animal going to do to handle this new exposure to salmonella, E. coli, or whatever? Well, they can't do much of anything. So you can basically take a perfectly wonderful animal, you can feed it some meat that's tainted with the salmonella or whatever the pathogen is, and you've now infected your animal. And one of the first telltale signs is the animal's great, I fed it some of this, and then the next day or next couple days it starts just crashing. It throws up, it might have diarrhea, comes down with a respiratory infection. Any of these different things are very straight indicators that something went wrong, especially when you have an animal and everything's great and then you feed it something and then noticeably there's a change, there's a shift. So one thing you need to understand, when these animals ingest this food, one of the first ways that they activate their metabolism, because in the wild these animals may eat all sorts of carrion and stuff like that, so they're going to need to elevate their body temperature by basking. So these animals can do something where they'll just sit and they'll bask and they get real hot. So that's a 250 watt bulb and that gets pretty hot. So that allows that animal to activate its metabolism, but it's also activating its immune response, and it basically starts breaking down some of these different nasty pathogens like the bacteria. So this is actually how nature has designed it. Well, it doesn't always work so well in captivity, and it's very easy to allow the animal to ingest what looks like a fine product to us, give it to the animal, and then the animal crashes. So if I actually gave this animal a basking lamp, let's go take a look. So if I have a hot spot right here, and I'm measuring this, if this eventually gets to be 120 odd degrees or higher, and I raise the ambient temperature for this animal, then you're helping the animal digest, but also you're actually helping it stimulate its immune response. So when these guys eat, one of the first things that they're going to do, they're going to be terrified of my phone, but they eat and they'll want to bask. And basically what they're doing is they're getting their metabolism in line, so it's going to start breaking down the material. So if they actually don't have enough temperatures to properly digest, what happens is the food starts to kind of rot, and you start developing a whole bacterial and microbial load in that animal's GI tract, which is problematic for that animal. That ultimately causes the animal to throw up. It can get pancreatitis, where it's not digesting the food properly or whatever, and that's something you want to consider. But these animals are going to want to get to a temperature where they can heat up enough to help break down the food and also optimize their immune response. If you don't do that, and you keep the animal on a low side of where it needs to be, and you don't give it enough heat to ever get to that point where it's not capable of thermoregulating, then basically you're allowing the bacteria and the different microbes that potentially was contaminated on the food to overwhelm the animal, and the animal will often throw up. They'll get sick, they'll get a respiratory infections, their eyes will close, their eyes get sunk in the head, they become listless, they have diarrhea, they fail to thrive, they no longer feed, and they act terrible. So this is all like real bad stuff. So with that being said, I'm trying to see somebody else. I guess I'll stick with these guys. It is important to make sure when you are feeding these kind of foods, you handle your food properly. And one of the best ways I would think of dealing with the food is, let's say I get ground turkey, ground chicken, whatever. I would say one of the safest things to do is to cook it partially. And so microwave it, do anything like that. So like a basic recommendation was, if this was ground turkey, and I wanted to make, let's say, something that's suitable for an animal, you can take the ground turkey, mix it with raw eggs, put some calcium and D3 in there, and you make these meatballs. Then you can partially cook them in the microwave. You don't need to cook them where it would be, cooked well enough where a person would go, oh yeah, I'd eat that. But the meat's gonna go from pink to gray. You're gonna put it into some type of environment, like the microwave or stove or whatever, where it gets hot enough where you think it's gonna kill salmonella. So, if you really examine this, you'd be putting a thermometer into the meat. You basically make sure the core temperature of the meat is a high enough point where it's actually killing pathogens. Well, all this different stuff is, are all good ideas when you're dealing with meat that comes from a grocery store. So remember, the butchers in a grocery store are handling all sorts of meat. They're processing a huge volume of food. So anything they touched that potentially was contaminated, and they go and touch something else and some utensils and all the different stuff. These are not surgeons. They're literally there to process a lot of this meat for human consumption. That's a great way to contaminate this food product, which ultimately you feed to your animals. So you could easily feed raw turkey or whatever to your animal and not have a problem. But there's always that day where you do it and you have a huge problem. So to be safe, I'm going to tell you it's probably very safe and a good husbandry note to at least partially cook any of this raw meat. It's really smart because when these animals get sick, it can be catastrophic. It puts these guys through a lot, and it will kill these guys. So we need to notice, just the reality is, oh look, chicken has a high, look at all the number of illnesses from chicken or whatever, but this could happen in anything, but it's a good rule of thumb. Just remember, this raw meat, even though you buy it in a grocery store, doesn't mean it's safe for consumption of your animal without you first handling it properly and doing a few safety precautions. All right, so hopefully this made some sense. Don't mind me, I have a bit of a cold right now, so my voice is a little whatever, but I hope and at least this video would help some people just go, wow, I didn't think about it like that. Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're just trying to basically improve our keeping techniques and things that we normally wouldn't even consider should be considered, because sometimes you don't care about it or think about it until you have a sick animal. So let's use our brains here, and it's pretty crazy. And one other thing was, clearly when I'm looking online, I was looking for some, I was trying to do some research, like what's the permissible salmonella levels and all this different stuff. So the meat industries, the poultry industries, all the different industries are going to do everything they can to mask the level or the allowable levels of salmonella, E. coli, any other kind of pathogens. They're going to try to basically do anything. And then they're going to keep on throwing things. Well, you can get salmonella from lettuce, and you can get salmonella from tomatoes and all that stuff, which is indeed true. But that doesn't take away from one thing. They will often take some of these sewage ponds, let's say from the pork industry, literally where they're lagoons of fecal material, and they take that fluid and then they take that and they spray it onto crops. So we're taking a lower intestine bacteria like E. coli, and we're spraying it onto produce that we would ultimately eat. And that's a really great way to contaminate tomatoes and lettuce and stuff like that. So these are the kind of things that are actually being done all across the country, because that wastewater has a massive level of nitrogen in there. When you spray nitrogen on the soil of these crops, you're basically spraying plant food, and you're going to improve the quality of the soil in the respect that plants will have some kind of nutrients that they would feed on that would actually increase their growth. But they're also spraying on potential pathogens, and it's going on to that lettuce or tomato or whatever the produce product is. And I started, as I was researching this stuff, just anecdotally I was researching, and it's very confusing out there. There's no clear answers, but you could easily have 30% or greater of your poultry, chicken, whatever, in the grocery store that has salmonella, and it's completely acceptable. So please do not think when you go into a grocery store that the meat you're looking at isn't contaminated with something, because a whole bunch of it is, and it's awe-inspiring. But the facts are very hard to kind of wade through, because there's counter information that's going to try to do everything it can to say how it's safe and you could get salmonella from all these other things. What the reality is you go into a grocery store, you potentially could expose yourself or the animal to one of these pathogens. So hopefully this has some value, but please don't forget to subscribe, like my page or my YouTube channel, and let me know what you're thinking. Thank you. Say goodbye.